All right, if there are folks at these sites, we welcome you to tonight's session. If anybody needs the PowerPoints, the materials for tonight, please give us a call at our 800 number, 800-640-4553, 800-640-4553, or visit us and connect with us via the website at sdparent.org, SD for South Dakota Parent.org. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rosa Herman, who is our Western Region Coordinator for South Dakota Parent Connection. And she will be presenting this evening's session on IEPs and parental rights. And under the protections of IDEA, families and students have many protections to ensure that they can access a free and appropriate public education. But unless families understand and exercise those rights, they're of virtually no value. So tonight Rosa will be providing us information on what those parental protections are and how you can learn to be the best advocate you can be for your student today and in the future. So thank you very much for agreeing to present tonight, Rosa, and we will turn it over to Rapid City.
There we go. Uh-oh. There. Okay. Can everybody see this?
And Sioux Falls, we can.
Okay. Everybody else? Okay. So, tonight we're going to talk about special education. We're going to talk about parents and what they need to know, what's important for us as we go through or think we need to go through an IEP process. It can feel very overwhelming at times. It can feel like there are new words that you're learning. It can feel as though you're actually on a different planet. But let me assure you that there are lots of things to help you. One of the things I want to point out tonight first is that we have a really great book. We did this in collaboration with a few other organizations. It's called What Parents Should Know About Special Education in South Dakota. And it is the law written in language that you or I could understand, and it's also specific to South Dakota. It has sections where it'll tell you in South Dakota this is. And I know when my son was going through this process, you could very easily look for say transportation, or you could look for any kind of services and get to know what that was. Hi Debbie, hi Stephanie, come on in, sign in, and there's little brochures there, or packets there for you. We have 2 more in Rapid City, yay. I'm always glad to have more people here. So, let's see if I can run all these little machines. Since he gave me like 4 of these. We'll try it. Heck with it. There we go. So, what is it that you need to know? There we go. Well, first of all, you need to understand that special education, and I'm going to step out of it because I don't need to be in this picture for everybody. With special education, the main focus is that it's specialized for your child. What is it that your child needs that is probably different from the child who sits next to him? And why does he need that? You also need to know that there's no cost for it, and that each child is individually tested, and it's determined if that child has a disability, what it is, and what we and the schools need to learn together to provide that education for the child. And when I say we, I usually am referring to us as parents. In 1975, we all know that the government passed a law called IDEA. And it's very important that we remember that that is a Disabilities Act, and that it really encompasses a lot of rights for kids and for people, for adults who have disabilities. So we have something that we really need to protect there. So, where might we get special education services? The school. How about other kids? What if somebody has a physical disability? Where might they get a service? Schools, home, sometimes a hospital for some kids. It could be a treatment center. So there's a variety of ways that the kids can receive a service, and it doesn't necessarily have to be exclusively in a school. Questions about that? Any of you get services outside of the schools? No. Most of the time, it is for kids that are in school. I mean, you see it most often at school. But there are other ways that kids will receive their services. There are a variety. There are a variety of types of services that your child can receive. One of the things we need to remember is that based on their evaluation is how they decide the different types of services that they'll get. And sometimes, even when we think our child, maybe we think our kids need speech and language, but if they don't score, on their little tests in that same way that a child who had a more severe disability, there's all of those numbers that they're looking at. So some kids will get more services than others. Some will get just one area focused on, even though parents may think that there's another area that they have a concern in. And what I usually tell parents is that when there is a concern in another area, to be documenting, to ask the teachers to document, to talk with your family physician, anybody else that your child would be around or be working with. Because many times you can access additional services, or sometimes they will add that service in a way that maybe it's not written into the IEP, but they're giving that extra time, or they are helping in that area, but doing it kind of in a roundabout way. Teachers are really good at doing 3 things when it's only identified as one. So if your child has other areas that you're concerned about, keep on top of that. Have other people help you to decide if it really is a problem area. And then, of course, encourage the staff that are working with them to help you with that piece of it as well. Okay, there we go. So the referral process. This is probably the one place that I have parents say that they get stuck at. It's like they say to somebody that they have a concern, but then they tell me nothing happened. Well, with a referral for a service, the school may not necessarily understand when you're just saying, I have this concern, that you want your child tested, or that you want your child to be fully evaluated. And so we strongly recommend that you always make those requests in writing. That way you have a record of it, they have a record of it. The other thing is that you also have the ability in that written request to tell them what it is you're concerned with and why. Now sometimes the schools will be the ones that identify a concern, and they'll say, hey, we'd really like to talk to you about this, and we'd like to do an evaluation, and are you open to it? And parents' rights through IDEA says, what? You can say yes, you can say no. You don't have to choose. If you think that your child doesn't have a speech concern, that it's just kind of normal development, you can say no, I think we're okay. He's coming along. I would tell you that when the schools do recognize a need, make sure that you have really listened and thought about what it is they have the concern with. Because the earlier you can catch any type of a disability, the easier it is for you to get that process started, but also the quicker the better for the child. Okay. Let's see, we kind of covered that, but the other thing that I didn't talk about was that you could say yes or no, or the school or you can say, let's try something different. So sometimes, I notice this especially with reading and math, the school will say, well, let's put them in a special reading group, or let's have them do some of this extra stuff. And they have it kind of thought out in their minds of the things that they can do or give to the kids. Or maybe it's that you are a part of that you're going to do some extra at home. And then you're going to come back together at a certain time and decide, are we doing better? Are we at the same place we were before? And then maybe you will decide together whether you should do an evaluation or not. The same would hold true for other types of concerns, behavioral concerns. Maybe you don't see problems at home, but at school they're kind of having a little bit of problem. Or it might be vice versa. I've seen that happen too. And so maybe you each trade your ideas of what works at home, what doesn't, what works at school, what doesn't, and you work together to see if somehow you can implement that and to see if you can alleviate the concerns that you're having. So even if you say no initially, you can always go back and say, yes, let's do this. And at any time, you can write that written request to have a referral done for full evaluation. There is no time frame or no number of times that you can ask for a referral. Schools do not like to retest because we don't want kids learning to attest. So you will find they'll say, hey, we did that test 2 months ago. We might try something else first before we go ahead because he wasn't, showing the deprivations that we thought he would. But you can always ask for that full evaluation and then work with the school on receiving that. So, why would you have an evaluation? A lot of parents don't want, we don't want our kids to be identified as having something else going on or being different. None of us want to be different, and yet all of us are different. Probably the prime reason to have evaluations is to make sure that your child has everything that they possibly need, to rule out any kind of concerns that you or the school has, to also find out what some of their strengths are, what areas might just need that little extra boost, and then ultimately so that not only will you be helping to meet whatever need is shown, but also so that the school is and any other entity that you're going to involve as you move along through the evaluation process. We all know about the variety of tests that can happen as part of an evaluation. And not every child has the same types of tests. You look at them where they're at now. You talk with those people who know them best. Family, school staff, doctors, therapists. If you have a child that academically is doing fairly well but is having behavioral issues, we probably aren't going to have to do all of those academic type tests, but you're going to have to look more into that social emotional areas. So most of the time, the group, a team, will look at and say, yeah, here's where we need to look. So it may be through medical reports, it may be through a full academic evaluation, it could be through interviews and through psychological reports. But there are many resources that parents can use for that and that the school staff can use as well. So it's not just like, oh, let's go in and take a test. When your children have something going on or you are concerned with certain areas, you're going to sit down and talk about what those areas are along with the school staff and what they're seeing. So we come back to that team idea again, that you as a parent should always be involved in that team aspect. You know your child best. So you want to make sure and keep yourself involved in that. Again, if we have no academic issues but we have behavioral, does that impact academic? Oh yeah, eventually, through a lot of different ways. Maybe they won't get up in the morning and go to school. Maybe they're disruptive in the classroom. But does that mean that academically they can't succeed? No. It just means that there's a different area that needs to be looked at. And that's that individual piece of IEPs, individual education plans. That's why they're called IEPs, because they are for the child. As always, as parents, you need to be asking those important questions. What kind of tests are you using? You need to be looking for yourself. You know, if you are really active on the computer, get on there and look it up. Find out what it is. If there's words that you didn't ask somebody what that meant, a lot of times people in different fields, we use all these, acronyms, we talk the talk. And so if somebody has said something that you didn't understand but you didn't feel comfortable asking, then find somebody that can help you. Whether it's through the computer, whether it's by calling back to the school, whether it's by finding someone like South Dakota Parent Connection who can help you process through that, whoever it is, find that person and say, what did they mean by this? Because we have to know what's going on as parents. So you want to know what kind of assessments they're going to do. You want to know, are these really accurate? Is this what most of the other schools or use, or how do they utilize them? As far as when they get them back, then what does that mean? You want to know that it's in the child's language. Now that probably seems to be just kind of a no-mer to us. It's like, well, of course. But if you think about it, if we have somebody from Somalia, but the child can speak some English, some schools may not know how to access that resource or have someone readily there, and possibly if a parent or some sort of an advocate doesn't ask for that, it may not happen. So we want to make sure that kids, it's always those tests are in the language that the child best understands. First language, best understood. Can you see the test results? What do you think about that one? Yes. And can you have somebody explain them to you? Yes. And really and truly, you need to do that. I have worked now for 2 years with South Dakota Parent Connection, and I can tell you that I can look at tests that parents will bring in, and I still will not understand totally, because that's not my field of expertise. Now, when I worked for Head Start, I learned to read kids' immunization records, but I still was very careful. I could say, oh, you had this and this, but you really need to find somebody that understands. And so normally, that should be done in a meeting where they go back over the test results and explain anything that you don't understand. Don't be afraid to ask for that. Even if you meet with that person who did the test prior to the actual IEP meeting. Just make sure that you're feeling comfortable with the whole process and that you have the information that you feel that you need to have to help make the decisions that may be made for your child. Yes, sir.
How do you go about finding out, or to talk to your person that did the testing prior to the IEP? How do you go about?
How do you go about asking for that? Well, here in Rapid, what I did was I contacted the special ed director, and I asked who that person was for that specific, what tests were, I kind of knew what tests were happening, but then when I said I'd like to talk with the person who did the testing for the mental health stuff and the social emotional. I mean, I knew in my mind what it was I wanted to see. I already kind of knew where my son was academically, and through the years, you know, you kind of get so you can read a lot of those tests if your child is older. But I wanted to talk to that school psychologist, but I didn't exactly, at the first time, I didn't know that that's who I was asking for. It was the school psychologist. So the special ed director in each school should be able to give you that information. I mean, it may take them a day to get back to you to say, well, these are the tests that he had, so what are you most interested in, or what are you worried about, or where do you want to have some other input for that person?
What if your special ed director seems to be hard to talk to at times, not being able to give answers?
Well, Lisa, do you want to answer that one, or do you want me to?
Well, I'm going to back up a little bit. If any family member is putting in a request for an evaluation, I would always recommend, and I think we would always recommend, write in that request that you would like to receive copies of all evaluation results and reports prior to the IEP meeting. Putting it in writing is going to resolve a lot of the issues.
And that should have the person's name on it that did the evaluation. Am I correct in that, Lisa?
That's right. So you should get the evaluations back with the names of who conducted it. So you can go right back to that person and ask questions. Marcia has a burning statement. Go on, Marcia.
Actually, before you even consent to an evaluation, they give you a sheet of paper that has the evaluation plan on it and what tests are going to be done and who is going to do them. So you should know that even before the evaluation even takes place. You have to actually sign a piece of paper as a parent that says you acknowledge that these are the assessments that are going to be done. So you should already know that.
And so to follow up on that, some of the assessments will be in the classroom. You know, they're going to be looking at kids. Now, if you have a kid with an attentional disorder, do you think that their behaviors are going to be shown maybe during art class and recess and PE? Or do they really need to be observed in reading and math? Those are the kinds of things as a parent you can bring to the plate and say specifically and say, please write on this. You know, do not evaluate them in art and PE. Now, if they have disorders that might impact social skills and those kinds of things, you know, maybe you do want them in those kinds of social environments to be assessed to see. Now, specifically to going to a case manager or a special educator and feeling like you're not getting any results, there again, put it in writing, put the date on it, sign your name, and you know, you can hand it off or mail it or CC it. And if you do email it, give a CC copy to the principal or somebody else. Even when you're doing a hard copy, it's a really good practice to keep a copy for yourself with the date and the signage and who you handed it to or who you mailed it to. And then send it to 2 people so that there is some checks and balances, because you have the right to receive what you're asking for. But when you do it informally, and informally means over the phone, informally means by voice in the hall or stopping in their office, informally can even be email. You want it written down, hard copy, so that the clock is ticking, and if you don't get what you need, you have the proof that you asked for it, so you can say, just a minute, we're not going to go anywhere until my request is met. Did that answer your question at all?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. And I think I saw a couple eyebrows go up when you said, well, you sign, I think Marcia said, will you sign off on that? I think you do sign off on that, but I'm not sure that it always tells you who's going to be doing the testing. It may say what area of testing. And I think as parents, probably we need to remember that we can ask for that, and asking ahead of time to be able to visit with that person. And I think that's probably part of the good piece of having some of this education is to say, I know that I can ask ahead of time to speak with that person. And I know that I can ask, you know, why would you, let's not test during math, let's test during PE. So it makes total sense what they were saying. The other thing to remember is about independent educational evaluators, independent people. If your child is working already with a therapist, or your child, let's say, works like at a children's care center, or some other entity that's working with them, it's also important that that information is shared prior to the evaluation, and that their oversight, that their record of their work is also included in that, so that it can be considered, utilized. I mean, why do something twice that's already there? Now, I'm trying to think on this particular, well, I'm just going to keep going.
Rosa?
Since I know it's going to, yeah.
I have a
Go ahead.
When would people want to have an independent education evaluation?
I think there are certain, I'm kind of drawing this one out of my hat because I'm probably going to need help with this. But my thought is that oftentimes the school setting may not be the ideal setting to have certain testings done, and there needs to be people from outside that academic world that we utilize. I don't think the school has medical staff that could accurately identify the needs of a child with specific disabilities. I think we also find families often asking for that individual evaluation when you're seeing behavioral issues for kids. I think that we have school psychologists, but you know, oftentimes their evaluation is, and I know their time is valuable and spread out over a lot of kids, but if you've been working with a therapist or you have a specialist in an area that your child is going to need more than what the school professionals have, then I think that's when you go ahead and ask for them to have that done, or that you have that done. Lisa, you want to, or Marcia, do you want to add more to that, or Francie?
Well, and I would say sometimes parents will receive a report that they question how valid it might be, or if it's really accurately representing their child, and so they might ask for an independent evaluation, maybe on the same, on the same topic. Maybe it might be an autism spectrum disorder, or there might be something that they just are not convinced, or there's inconsistencies, and so they want an independent evaluation that is either going to corroborate and support the school evaluation, or may say, no, we are really finding a concern here. And then there are things, like you said, Rosa, where the schools don't have the expertise, and so maybe they don't do an evaluation, but parents, many times by the time they're at this stage, they kind of become experts on their child and the kind of concerns, and they can do some checking, and they might be able to find that they need to request a certain kind of an evaluation that isn't standard or in the norm. And an example would be when my daughter was being evaluated, and this was back before sensory integration was as well known or as commonplace the terminology as it is nowadays. But grave sensory integration concerns that weren't assessed. And so it was very apparent there was a thread running through all of the evaluations that indicated a problem. And so doing a little background, I knew to officially request a sensory integration evaluation. that actually the school district did and had to send to Denver to be scored. And it came back, basically she was not successful in any part of the test, indicating she had very significant impairments in that area. So that would be an example of kind of a real life situation where you could ask that. So you might disagree with what the school evaluation has shown, or there is something that's not been addressed, and so you want this as an additional piece of information. Does that make sense?
Francie, I think so. Francie, did you have something to add to that?
It's always good to get second opinions, and a neutral person, and especially someone that has a broader range of how these disabilities affect children even into their adulthood and through transition, because a school psychologist is going to be concentrating on a particular population. And when you also bring into the effect of a disability which might have a really broad range effect on a learning behavior, such as blindness, because a psychologist is going to be looking at the academic relationship but not really understanding the medical part of the blindness, because you may need an independent eval from the blind services. Then they will, combine and have justification and a lot more power for the right direction for the child.
Thank you.
It gets very complicated, I think.
And ultimately, the thought is, don't be afraid to ask for that second eval. If you don't agree, you have that right to ask for it. If the school says no, which they have the right to do, then you can either pay for it yourself or you can go through a due process hearing, which basically means that, there's people in the state level who decide whether the school is doing appropriately and what they should be doing through their testing, or if the school should take that next step. So don't be afraid to ask for more. Don't be afraid to say, I really disagree with this. Again, you know your child best. Okay, so now the evaluations have all been done and you are comfortable with the decision that your child has a special need. Now what? Well, you have that first team meeting with the school. How many of you have gone to those first team meetings? How many of you went alone? How many wish you hadn't have? Yes. I'm raising my hand to all of this in case you guys can't see that, which I know you can't. Those meetings are a little scary. Those meetings are definitely unbalanced. It's not meant to intimidate, but it's just that most parents go alone. You just do. I mean, I think you're just thinking, okay, let's go. Let's get it done. I would always recommend, if nothing else, you take a friend. Just to have somebody else there to hear things. I remember different times when things would be said and all of a sudden my ears would kind of be ringing. I mean, it was like it was too much. It was like overpowering me. And I know I missed things, and I know that because I got emotional, that I couldn't always say what I needed to say. And so I think having a friend there, maybe to write some notes, or being able to talk about, can we stop for just a minute? Can we take 5 minutes? Can we come back? And give yourself that time to breathe and think what's just been said. But you will have a team meeting, and you will be outnumbered. There's just not really any doubt about that. And if you have built some relationships already, hopefully you feel more comfortable with that. Because the idea of a team is that we all play together. And we all play nice. And we all agree. And in the real world, we know that doesn't happen. But this team is very important to your child. So I'm not telling you that you have to play nice. I'm telling you that the more respectful you are, the more you learn and educate yourself with, the easier it is to ask for what you need and to be comfortable doing that, even when your ears are ringing, even when your heart's beating way too fast. So during the meetings, you're going to review the evaluation, and then you're going to set up the IEP for your child. Now, one of the things that parents will often ask me is, what should be in the IEP? You know, I remember going the first time, and I guess because teachers are teachers and specialized teaching staff, I just assumed that they knew best. And I'm not telling you that they didn't. But what I'm telling you is, you go along, you need to understand what your child's disability is, what are the things that they're going to need, and how are they going to get them, or should they be getting them. And you need to be a part of making those decisions. I can remember one of the first things that I learned in an IEP meeting. And this was not for my son, this was when I worked for Head Start. This was for a 3-year-old, and on the IEP it had written that this child would have 2 hours of speech therapy each week. Now, first of all, I remember looking at it and thinking to myself, even though I'm a social worker, 2 hours of time is not probably developmentally appropriate for a 3-year-old. So I looked and I said, so like, do you break that time up? And, well, the answer to me was, well, we need to give him 2 hours a week. But really and truly, when it's written out, it needs to be written out in a way that accommodates development, that accommodates that extra need the child has. By the time we got done with that little guy's IEP, it was that 15 minutes, 4 times a week, in this setting, he would receive speech therapy. And I just kind of stuck to that because developmentally, he needed every day to have that therapy, because we know how kids learn. They got to have that repetition. And you can give them 2 hours, and a week later, you're not going to be building. There's not a building block there. So that's one of the first things that I ever learned, was that you need to look at the language and think for your own child, is that appropriate? Will that work? Now, you know, if you have an ADHD kid, you got to think, what is going to work? What will not work? So, questions on that piece of it. Does that kind of make sense? Can you reach out to other resources? I asked other parents. I said, because when we started out, my son was ADHD. So I asked other parents, you know, what kind of things should be on his IEP? And then I learned from some teachers who were excellent with my son, the types of things that worked well. And so as we moved along, even as he got older, it was like, well, how do we still do that, except now he's in middle school? How do we make sure that he still has that quiet spot where he can go when he's like overloaded? And I know for Lisa too, with her daughter having all the sensory issues and the processing issues, you know, she's in high school now. And so even the things that they learned in middle school, sometimes you have to take those and put them into high school level and figure out, how is that going to happen? Because we know it works, and that's what they need. But now how do you do that as a junior in high school? The other thing is that there are many websites where you can tap into IEPs that have been written. I learned a lot there too. You know, different ideas. And even some that actually some of the teachers said, I would have never thought of that. That kind of feels good on occasion when that happens. But, and they appreciated that. So if you have the time, seek out that extra resource to know some of the things that might be beneficial to help your child. Okay. So here are the people that basically are invited to the IEP team meeting. We encourage parents to include their children when that child is at an age that they feel comfortable and that it's appropriate, and that's kind of up to the parent. But definitely by the time they're getting close to middle school, it is important for them to be a part of it, because that way they understand better what's going on, especially if something's happening for them that doesn't happen for somebody else. Because what's the worst thing for anybody? To feel different. And so if your child gets to, has a one-on-one teacher, or has a time when they go in another classroom or do something that's different, less take-home work, that sort of thing, this helps them to understand and to be a part of what's going on. Kids can tell us, and in those IEP meetings, I remember a couple times when my son would say, I get really frustrated when this happens or when this happens. So these people will be there. You can include your child, and then you can include others. So that would be where you get that friend, that relative. Sometimes it might be a navigator from our program, and for those of you that don't know about our navigator program, we'll talk about it after this. But you can have someone there with you. You do not have to do it alone. So as you work together, you're going to come up with a plan. And that's a plan that you're all going to sign off on. And it's really important that everybody is on the same page with that. Well, I kind of skipped around, didn't I? Just this talks about, that the school is responsible for getting the meeting set up, for telling you in advance. All these things are going to come written. Lisa said, write it. As I went through college, rule of thumb, if you don't write it down, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So you need to remember that for yourself too as you work with the school and that you're asking for things. Write it down. Ask for it. Sign it. Date it. And keep your copies. Again, without reading off of the page, the IEP should have some basic, the invitation to the meeting should have some basic information on it for you. Date, time, where it's going to be, who's going to be there, what it's about. Now, if you can't be there, you can participate by phone. But you can also ask for it to be rescheduled at a time that works for you. You do have the right to be there, and the school will make effort to include you in that. I just think that you have to remember that those scheduling things are hard for everybody. So if you work until 5:30 at night, in the evening, or at late afternoon, you might need to try to do an IEP earlier in the morning. If you have younger children, you might want to let the school know that and ask how they can help you because you want to be there in person. But always, we want the schools to be trying to accommodate your needs and you trying to work with them for what needs they have as well. So you get to the IEP meeting. The first time you go, you kind of lost. Doesn't make a lot of sense. But the one thing that I always did for my son after about the first year of having an IEP was I asked if they would please start with his strengths. We all know our kids' faults. We all know those problem areas. And for most of us, sorry, I get emotional about that. Most of us, we don't need to hear the junk, There's probably nothing you can tell me about my kid that I don't already know. And to start a meeting on a negative tone, and when professionals are working, a lot of times we just want to get to the quicksand, We just want to get right into it. And what are we going to do, and how are we going to do it? And it's never intentional, never. But I can tell you that sometimes you have to ask for what you need because they don't recognize how emotional it can be for you or how difficult it is. So don't be afraid to start the meeting out and to ask them to start with your son's strengths. The other piece of it for me was I want to know that these people in this room know who my son is. Because there were a couple times there were people in the room that didn't even know what his name was. And that's not acceptable to me. So, start with his strengths. Ask for that. Because he or she has many more than the concerns that you're going to share. Now, are there going to be concerns you're going to talk about? You bet. Because with every child, with every disability, there are things that for us as parents are hard to talk about. They're hard to see our child going through. They're hard for us to deal with on a daily basis. So yes, you are going to also be talking about the concerns, but not just their concerns. You're going to talk about your concerns too. And that's where sometimes you just have to be really honest with if your child doesn't do well with someone who maybe is real kind of loud and more aggressive and your child is maybe more passive at this point, you need to be expressing that. Because our kids have to be in an environment where they can learn. And so if there are problem areas, you have to be able to talk about that as well. So if you have concerns, this isn't just about the school's concerns or the concerns identified through the evaluation. This is also about your concerns. So keep that in mind. So you will go through the evaluation results. If they start talking gibberish and you don't have a clue what they're talking about, stop. You need to go back. I don't understand this. To explain it to me. There are so many different tests and so many different, like I said, acronyms and things. And if you don't understand something, ask. And don't be afraid to ask. Talk about functional needs. What does your child do every single day? What do you see? What can they do? What can't they do? What do they try to do? And then you're going to talk about services. So what does that mean? All that stuff put together, what does that mean for my child? What does that mean that we're gonna do? And sometimes the speech and the language and the math is a little bit easier to figure out than when you have those disabilities that are, you've got multiple disabilities on top of each other, or you're having one thing happen and then a behavior on top of it. It's like if all my child had if all we had to worry about was some speech and that we could go in and work on that. And that's not to say that isn't important, because we know that it is. But if that was the only thing that was going on, it would make our jobs easier as parents. And it would probably be the easiest for the school too. We just bring a speech and language person in and we just work on it, and hey, everything will be great. But I think most of us know that's not the norm, especially not for those of us who have kids who have multiple disabilities or disabilities that have real depth to them as well. So these are the kinds of things that you need to be ready to talk about. I used to take notes with me because I knew I would forget things, because as you could just tell, I get emotional on certain things. That's my kid you're talking about. So write yourself notes, because I know too sometimes when you can just stop for a second and read your notes to yourself, you can kind of regain that composure and then be able to listen again and to be able to be a part of that meeting that's going to happen. Okay. As the IEP is developed, you're going to look at things that affect learning. Be that behavior, be that language, be that social interactions. You're going to look at all of those things too. Because we know that behavior that behavior impacts a child's ability to learn. We know that kids have to be able to communicate. And we also know that kids need to learn how to function in those social settings. So we really want to look at how is all of this impacting their ability to learn. Now, you may have a different idea than somebody else in that team. Some people don't think that certain behaviors should, that they'll need to address that, because what does that have to do with his math score? But if my child is distracted by somebody else tapping his pencil all the time, or if my child is constantly looking at the clock, that's going to impact his math scores. There is no doubt. There's a variety of scenarios that you can give yourself because you know your kids. But there's so many things that impact their learning. And yes, kids need to learn how to help themselves, but we have to help them to see if they can do that. Some of them can. Some of them can help themselves and work through those. There are others that it's going to take kind of a half and half, or sometimes it's going to take more of us than them. So we need to remember that there's academic issues, but there's also functional issues. And we are going to have to look at that and think about how do we build an IEP then that addresses both of those. Okay. Questions at this point? I feel like I'm just talking. Any questions at this point?
I think a big issue for families, we know at Parent Connections, is kids have behaviors that get them sent out of the room or to another setting or to the principal's office or whatever. And that is a direct impact on their ability to be in the classroom and learn. If they're not in the classroom, how can they learn? How can they be engaged? And so, families will often, say, well, or schools might say, well, yeah, but, they're doing fine. They don't have any academic challenges. But if they have behaviors that, as you said, impact their ability to pay attention, impact their ability to stay in their seat, impact their ability to remain in the classroom to learn, or remain in what are traditional school settings, that has a direct impact on their ability to be in the classroom and have that instructional time.
Thank you, Lisa. So you're going to be a part of that team, and you're going to need to be the one that helps think about what should happen. I would assume most of you have seen an IEP before, so you can kind of go through, what it looks like. And they're written a little differently with each school district. Not everybody uses the same forms. But basically, they give us an overview of what they're doing, how they're doing in school, the goals, objectives, services they're going to get, and then they talk about least restrictive environment. Everybody know what least restrictive environment is? That's a fun one sometimes. Trying to make sure that a child receives services in the least restrictive environment, which basically means with the least amount of restrictions is really what it means. So that if a child can be in a classroom with a half dozen children versus being isolated, that would be the least restrictive. If a child can be in a full classroom with accommodations or modifications versus the group of 6, that's the least restrictive. Now, we used to, whenever, especially before IDEA, if you think about it, if you had a child that was blind or in a wheelchair, or a child that had major behavioral issues, well, behavioral issues, I remember when I was in school, a long time ago, what happened with those kids? We're out of here. Middle school was probably it for them. That's back when principals could still spank kids, you know? We really didn't address behavioral issues very appropriately 30 years ago. So, actually longer than that. But we have progressed to know that there are ways to deal with behaviors, and there's a reason, most often, for behaviors. I was going to say one of the other things that's really important as you develop your IEP is that you understand age-appropriate development for your child's age group. And we had a conversation about this, a parent and I, not long ago, because her child is a 7th grade girl and she's boy crazy. And mom was just so upset, and they had to do therapy, and and this girl had some cognitive delays, but is boy crazy or being interested in the other sex abnormal for 7th and 8th grade girls? Not really. You know, I think I remember that. So we need to also know what areas are pretty normal. A 3-year-old, parallel play? Yeah, okay. So it's important that you understand that even if your child has a disability, they have a lot of other areas where they are going to probably be on task developmentally. And so we need to be prepared for that. I especially see that happen as kids mature, because we kind of get used to dealing with, we kind of put them into a box and we deal with it. And then when they start to grow and mature, all of a sudden we're like, oh, now what's going to happen? And can they do this? And how will they make those decisions? So do know developmentally where your child should be and what's normal at that age group. I just keep moving on this. You guys can read. Okay. So you got your IEP. You've gotten started. Now they're going to put in modifications. What might a modification be? Francie, what's one modification you can think of?
Any kind of technology that he may need for assistance.
Okay. Other kinds of modifications that you guys know of, or that you know that your child receives?
Well, and this is Lisa Rosa in Sioux Falls, and I think it's very important that families understand the difference between a modification and an accommodation. They are different things, and they mean different things. And when all is said and done, especially when kids come out of school, if you have a lot of modifications, or you have modifications and modified classwork and modified grades, and you want them, and they want to go on to some kind of post-secondary school and training, modifications means different expectations. It means really lowering the bar. And accommodation is something that allows the student to demonstrate what they can do in a different way, such as a student with a visual impairment or with a dyslexia, having textbooks or something read to them, and they're being able to speak to and have that information translated on paper for them. That would be an example of an accommodation, versus a modification, which is going to be less than the typical expectations. So it would be, different grading, different expectations for what they need to learn. So it really is, a modification means it's different than the standard curriculum or the standard expectation. So families want to be really clear about the difference between those two things. And accommodations are always appropriate. Modifications are needed, but we never want to modify when an accommodation will do the job. Does that make sense, hopefully?
I have a question on that because working with the school system, it was explained to me that for a child to be in a general classroom, they basically could modify it. They would accommodate it by reading the test questions to him. But to change the number of questions on the test or to change material or expectations, they couldn't modify it because then with his transcript going to a college to apply, then they felt it would be an unfair representation of his ability.
So, and there's a difference between a modification and accommodation. So, a modification would be, an accommodation is a student might be asked, a student might have 2 or 3 multiple choice questions instead of 4. That is an acceptable accommodation.
That's what was done. They would give him fewer.
Okay, so that's an accommodation, not a modification, because they still have to show the content, but for processing speed or other kinds of things, they're reducing the amount of text or whatever that a student might have. Students who have highlighted books, they're getting the same content, but they're able to not have to do so much busy work because they don't have to read through absolutely everything would be an example of an accommodation, a highlighted text. So there are sometimes disputes, and they're again asking for the school to put down in writing why they are denying you and what might they suggest as an acceptable accommodation to get the job done. And sometimes parents do have to ask and do have to push to make things happen that are really pretty straightforward.
Rosa, what did you ask, accommodation or modification?
I asked modification. And I think that's why Lisa came on to clarify that. And I have to tell you that even as you hear it, it's still hard to think about it as far as it's just something that you have to keep over and over in your mind. And you have to also there's times when you have to decide, like Lisa said, you know, if it's an accommodation, we want that. If it's a modification, is that something that is going to cause problems later on? And sometimes too, I think schools will, and I think probably we do too. I think that we look at accommodations and modifications almost as the same thing, and yet they're not. And I think that we just want our kids to be successful, and so however we have to do that, we're trying to access that. But I do agree with Lisa that for some kids it can make a big difference, and especially when they hit high school, you start to realize that if they're going to want to go onward educationally, academically, there is a difference between modifications and accommodations.
A really easy to define modification might be resource rooms are modified classrooms, cluster classrooms are modified classrooms. Individual self-contained classrooms, those are all modified classrooms and modified settings. So really we expect different things than the general student population in that general curriculum.
So with higher education, my son's really at this point, but sort of modifications are happening already at this age. And high school or college, is that not even a possibility if they had those modifications along the way?
And I hope I didn't get her, she was saying her student is still young. How old?
He's kindergarten.
Okay,
Very
very
we know
young.
already next year we're having one more modification.
Basically, parents always want to be thinking long term because they are the only ones who are in it for the long term with their students. So if our students never have the opportunity to succeed, they won't, right? And there are good reasons to have modified supported settings so your kids can be successful. You want them to be successful. You also want them, to be able to succeed at the standard curriculum for their grade. And really where the rubber meets the road when it comes to modifications and accommodations are really starting at high school, because that's where you have the transcript to post-secondary. So that's where families really need to be thinking very diligently about modifications and accommodations. At the earlier stages, you obviously have a lot of leeway. It's not going to necessarily show up on the college transcript. But you just, if your student is capable of doing grade level work in the typical setting, and they just need supports and accommodations to do that, that's the least restrictive environment for them, and that's where they should be. If they are not going to be successful that way, then they need to be where they're going to be successful and learning the most. And hopefully they're going to gain the skills they need to be able to get back into that fully mainstream environment.
Can a transcript have indication of the class is modified? Can they put that on a transcript?
I think some schools can, if they choose to do it that way, but most don't. It's either
They
or.
could not put indicate a class is modified.
Yeah, most of them, it's either or. Your regular, your grade, super.
And
Graduating off the IEP.
And those are the questions that are being asked. Hopefully everybody can hear is, are those modified classes in high school indicated on the transcript? Those are exactly the kinds of issues you want to bring up during the IEP and have answered. Those are exactly the kinds of questions that you want to be asking about and addressing.
And Marcia, what was your answer to that?
My answer was, I think that some schools have, but most schools that I've ever worked with do not show modified grades. It's either a regular grade or they graduate from their IEP goals and objectives.
Okay.
And the other thing to look at for the post-secondary is, those post-secondary institutions are going to look at that transcript. And what are their standards? Their standards are usually 3 years of math at algebra and higher, 3 or 4 years of English. And so, the high school classes have the same coding kind of as college classes do, 101 and those kinds of things. So, look at those grade level numbers to see what those are showing up, and those will kind of be an indication. Now, having said that, there really is a lot of leeway and supports. ADA goes into post-secondaries. Every post-secondary school has a disability coordinator. So students are supported to be...
They can continue to get the same well, maybe not the exact same, but fairly close to the same accommodations in college as they did in high school.
But in college and post-secondary, there's no such things as modifications.
They'll accommodate you by giving you more time on the test, letting you take it in a private area with a different proctor, and work with you on your ABA specifications from your diagnosis, from your doctor. But yeah, the modifications, you're not going to cut it.
No, like lowering the average for grades or anything like that. In college, they won't do that. So back to the IEP. That was a good conversation, though. Oh, we have one more question over here.
I'm trying to sneak it in before
Okay.
it's too late. The example she used before about 2 multiple choice questions instead of 4 due to like a processing delay, is that an example of a modification then or an accommodation?
Accommodation.
Did you hear? Accommodation.
Thank you.
Okay. So on the IEPs, there will be the modifications, dates, places, times of service, transition services, I'm going to come back to that, age of majority, how progress is measured. And how progress is measured is always kind of fun to read, isn't it? When you think about it. He will do so many of this in so much time, or he will be able to recite this, or those are always kind of interesting to read. Transition services is a big issue for me because in our state we don't have to start until they're 16, and we at South Dakota Parent Connection firmly believe that the earlier the better, I guess you would say. And that is more.
Early. Yeah.
But we want, especially by middle school, we want parents in particular to understand what that means as far as transition services. So you're going to be seeing us do getting a lot of information out there and doing different types of activities that share with parents about transition services, because it is vital to those kids that those services happen. And it's something that I have to tell you that I didn't know a thing about until my son was a senior in high school. And although they had written something in there, it wasn't anything we really talked about. So transition services, just keep that in your mind, because a lot of us have smaller children, but those that have older kids, that is something you definitely need to read about and understand and get more information from us on, because it is vital. It is vital. So I'm in a soapbox for that one, so I'll just keep going here. Then we're going to think about placement. Special ed is a program, not a place. I'll be darned. Because it used to be years ago, special ed was a room, a building, or somewhere that the other kids got on a bus and went to. That is not true anymore. It is a program. It is the services that kids get. And those services come through your partnership on the IEPs of what your kids need and should have. Least restrictive environment comes into play in placement. And of course, the more closely your child can be to what the norm is, that's where you want them to be. If they can learn in the regular classroom, so be it. If they can learn in that group of 6 we talked about, that's least restrictive then. But your hope is eventually your child can be integrated, because we all know that the social emotional piece fits into that. So our goal should be that our kids are in the least restrictive and hopefully as close to the average regular classroom that they can get into.
What kind of age do they have to, like if your kid's going to be in a classroom environment where you may feel that may be the best place of learning, what do they got to do as far as aides to be able to come in and help? How do they accommodate you on that? Or do they have to accommodate you with aides to do that? Okay.
Are you talking one-on-one? Or are you just talking having help for the teacher? Having an extra person in that classroom? Or are you talking one-on-one? Child to...
I think it's kind of a little bit of both. Some of it's one-on-one, but some of it's that extra person in there to help. Maybe it's not even just your kid, it's a couple of kids in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Well, that can be reviewed at your IEP meeting. You're going to have to be able to show the need for that, and that most classrooms, they try to have a teaching assistant. And for some kids, they will have that one-on-one person there with them. I'm just, I'm trying to, Lisa, I'm lost on that one, and I apologize to the whole group, but did you hear what his question was? Okay.
Yeah.
Can you answer that, or can Marcia,
And Marcia's a behavior strategist here, so she can fill us in as well, but this is a kind of question that's going to be unique to every situation, because the IEP is an individual plan based on that individual child. So without knowing your child and their needs, and the other thing is, who is their teacher? What is the subject? There are so many variables that really is an individual IEP kind of a question. And so for the dad that maybe asked that, give us a call at Parent Connection, are you in Rapid? Where are you?
Yes, they are.
That's a question. Where are you? Or the
Rapid.
In Rapid, okay. You can make an appointment with Rosa or give her a call or maybe visit after the session to maybe get some strategies. But it would be nice to say this is what you need to do to have that done. But it really is unique to your student and your school and the grade and even the teacher that they have. So Marcia,
Not to mention the administration and the amount of money that they have available.
well,
to pay
but
for
you know what?
parents.
The money they have available is never a parent's concern. The student needs the educational services they are entitled to. So if parents ever hear about we don't have the money for that, you are welcome to say, well, I appreciate there's difficult decisions, but my student is guaranteed a free and appropriate public education. And so I just need to make sure that he has what he needs to be successful and access his education. So parents hear all the time, I'm sorry, we can't do that, we have the money. And feel free to say, I know it's tough, but I also know that that's not a reason to deny my student a service. So I'm going to be calling Parent Connection and maybe getting a navigator.
There you go. I don't know if there's any specific criteria that schools use to determine when they're going to add a para. I think typically when they add paras is when there is a possibility of harm to the student or to other people in the environment. It's typically when they're going to add a para.
And the truth is, if you are in one school, you've seen one school.
Right.
Every school is different. Every school district is different, and buildings within districts are different. So, there's not a hard and fast rule. As a parent, your obligation is to get your child the supports they need to access their education. And so,
If the need, it needs to be met to result in an appropriate education for your child.
so they need what they need so that they can learn and remain in the classroom. So if they need an aid so that they can remain on task, remain engaged, remain not bothering other people or disrupting the classroom and learning, then those are all some valid reasons. But again, really that's an individual IEP process kind of a question. So I don't want to pass the buck, but that's the reality.
Thank you. I needed to hear that.
You stand up and clap.
Well, and I think that is really the best thing to do is when you really feel that there is something that your child needs, that you need to ask for it, and the schools need to consider it. And their answers need to be an answer that can help that child, not one that says, well, we don't have any money, or we don't normally hire people for that, or whatever. That's not the point. The point is, as Lisa said, what does that child need, and how will that child best learn? And again, as much as possible in that norm, in that regular classroom. So that, of course, can be that's an interesting battle on occasion. That's where we're going to go with that one. So let's go next. So here's some things that happen. Sometimes the school thinks this might be best and you think not, and especially with placements. Often, I gotta say though that most of the calls that I end up getting, the placements that parents want may be more restrictive than what the school wants. And so if that would happen to be the case for you, I think either way, I think you need to sit and look and think about what really is best for your child. Because I think sometimes what's happening is that the school environment can handle what's happening for the child academically and giving them what they need, but then the home environment does not have that ability. And that's when I start seeing problems arise. So if that becomes the case, then that's when we try to look for supports for the family. And that's also one of our desires, is to help families stay together, be together. So remember that if you do have a disagreement about that, again, we can help you process through that. And we also can help you with resources, because if there is something that you need in the home, maybe we can help you find that. So, things don't go really well. You're not agreeing, you don't like the plan that's coming out, you feel like it's not in the best interest of your child. What do? Well, the first thing you do is you sit down, review, think about what it is that you don't like or that you feel like is causing the problem, and you need to write that down for yourself. And you need to research it a little bit, you need to ask for some help about it, share with other parents, maybe share with professional staff, and then when you're ready, you need to meet with the school staff. If you still feel that you're not liking what you're seeing or what you're getting or not getting, then you need to ask for a meeting of that team, and then you need to share what the problem is. And it can be either at that point or it can be after that. Again, our navigators are there to help, because sometimes it is hard to put those concerns out there and to be able to do it in a way that says why it's such a concern for you. So our navigators try to come in and help you focus on the child, look at what is it that you really want, why is that in his or her best interest, and then they come into the meeting with you, they listen, they try to help everybody look at what's best for the child. If that doesn't work, then you have a mediation process that you can go through. You can then do resolution sessions. You can do due process hearings, and I would tell you that South Dakota has a lot less due process hearings because we feel that our navigators work well with the schools and with the parents, and that the team is able to resolve those issues and to get back to what is in the child's best interest. What does the law say? Because oftentimes it's that something's not being followed. So we're hoping that through our navigator program that we continue to see less due process and less filing of formal complaints, because we want everybody to be on the same team, and that team is called KID, because that's what we're all here for. So go ahead, Francie.
As a navigator and a parent of a child who's gone through 26 years in the school system, I have been on both sides of the fence. In my emotions, like you, I could come up with a tear at the drop of a hat. But putting on the navigator hat and trying to do what's right, the most important thing is not burning bridges and making sure that what you do looks as professional as what they provide. So that when you go somewhere, you're armed with information and you're armed with justification. This manual is an immense assistance because the teachers actually have it, but I have yet to meet a school that has read them. So when you can quote something from here, then they understand that you're not coming in with an emotion. And when you do go to school and you can meet people on their level and for the best interest of the child, and with a smile on your face, it's the typical thing you're going to get farther with sugar than the frustrations that you carry in your heart. When I go to school, first thing I do is, without the parents, I take a release of information so that they can talk to me. And I go and I meet the teachers, I meet the principal, and I let them know that they can call me to mediate for anyone. It's not just the parent that I'm there for. We're neutral, so that we can be there for the child. And it's a big job because every school, no matter what, they're all a little bit different. And every person is different, and they do have a little bit of an edge to them when someone's going to come, a parent or navigator, is going to come and try to tell them how to do their job. And that's hard, because you do want them to do their job, and you want them to do what's best for your child because they are the professional. So I think developing that team, but being armed with this book, read the book, and it's written so that any child can understand it with you. It's kind of cool, so.
And I think too,
Rosa?
yep,
I'm sorry, I
Yep.
have to interrupt. I think we've got like a minute and a half left. So what I'm going
Okay.
to, if you want to put it back on your camera and then talk about the book Francie is talking about, that any parent who does not have the book, What Parents Should Know About Special Education in South Dakota, should have one. Please give us a call at Parent Connection and we will get it out to you. Our number, 800-640-4553. And our website, sdparent.org. You can email us as well. Nope. And we,
Nope.
there you are. I thought we
It's
lost
just
you
a-
already, Rosa.
well, actually, that's not me, so.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll hurry up in case we're about to lose the line. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I want to do if anyone needs a certificate of attendance, contact Parent Connection. Email us, call us. We will get it out to you for attending tonight. And let's do a
Good questions,
Yep.
good questions, and good interaction.
And yes, and if you have follow-up questions, email us, call us at Parent Connection. Both Rosa and I will stay around a little bit.